This young Muslim outsmarted the arrogant atheist professor with nothing but a glass of water. The young Muslim left the entire hall bewildered and silenced the arrogant atheist professor with calm logic and a simple glass of water. At first, the professor laughed, confident he could destroy the young man's faith in just 5 minutes. But what happened next shocked everyone present. By the end of the debate, the professor and his followers were frozen in stunned silence. Some even collapsed to the floor in disappointment. Let's dive into this instructive story, and may those who subscribe be blessed with smooth paths in life. The large lecture hall was packed to the brim, every seat filled with people sitting shoulder to shoulder. Most of the audience consisted of intellectuals and thinkers, many of them longtime fans of Professor Joshua Watkins, a man known for his sharp mind and infamous for effortlessly tearing apart religious arguments. That evening, Professor Watkins stood confidently in the center of the stage, a mocking smile playing on his lips as his eyes arrogantly scanned the hall. Then, in his usual thunderous voice, he issued a challenge he often repeated. "Is there any Muslim here brave enough to prove the existence of God?" Silence fell over the hall. His voice sounded almost like a mockery. "Come forward," he said, "and I guarantee that tonight you will leave without your faith." A wave of unease rippled through the crowd. Some whispered quietly, others lowered their heads, unwilling to meet Watkins' gaze, the man who had defeated so many before. From a corner, a few scornful snickers could be heard from his loyal followers, confident that no Muslim would have the courage or intellect to face the fiercest atheist in debate. But suddenly, a hand rose from the crowd. A young man of about 24 calmly stood up, his gaze filled with quiet strength as he looked at the professor. His name was Abdurrahman. The hall burst into laughter. Heads shook in disbelief. To them, it looked like a lamb walking into a lion's den. A young man with no reputation, no debating experience, challenging the great Joshua Watkins. It seemed absurd. Watkins smirked, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the young man, like an adult amused by a child trying to act brave. "A young Muslim," he sneered. "Without an academic title, without a degree in philosophy or science, wants to debate me? To understand truth, you don't have to be a professor," Abdurrahman calmly replied. Watkins raised an eyebrow, now slightly intrigued. "All right," he said theatrically, spreading his arms wide. "Let's see what you've got." Abdurrahman walked to the stage and sat down on the chair prepared for him, directly across from Watkins. The spotlight shone on them both. Every eye in the hall was fixed on the stage. This was more than just a debate. It was a confrontation between faith and ego, between truth and arrogance. Some spectators still wore smug smiles, fully expecting another intellectual demolition by the professor. Watkins leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. "Let's start with a simple question," he said condescendingly. "If your God truly exists, show him to me. Where is he?" Light laughter rippled through the hall. It was a familiar trap Watkins had used countless times. After all, no one could show God, right? Without blinking, Abdurrahman calmly picked up the glass of water that was on the table. He raised it high so everyone could see. "Professor," he said, "do you believe in the existence of the human mind?" Watkins frowned. "Of course," he replied quickly. "Can you show it to me?" Abdurrahman asked. "Not the results of the mind, but the mind itself. Its form, its color, its shape." Watkins leaned back slightly, now understanding where this was going. "That's impossible," he admitted. "Exactly," said Abdurrahman, nodding. "We cannot see the mind, but we know it's real because we perceive its influence in thoughts, decisions, and innovations. It's the same with God. We may not see him directly, but we see his signs everywhere. In the perfect order of the universe, in the precise laws of nature, in the existence of life itself emerging from nothingness." A murmur spread through the audience. The once cynical expressions were changing, many now deep in thought. Watkins tried to regain control quickly. "But the mind is part of the human brain," he objected. "We know it exists because we use it ourselves. How can you prove that your God exists? How do you know that what you worship is the true God?" Abdurrahman smiled calmly. "Professor, Do you believe everything in this world has a cause? Of course, Watkins replied. Then if you saw a beautiful house with a complex design, would you believe it came from nowhere, without anyone's involvement? Of course not, Watkins said disdainfully. Then what about the universe? Asked Abdurrahman. Which is far more complex than any house. How could something so vast and intricate come into being without a creator? Abdurrahman's calm question echoed through the hall. Watkins fell silent, desperately searching for a loophole in the argument, trying to twist it in his favor. I can agree that there are natural laws governing the universe, he finally said. But that doesn't prove the existence of God. It only shows that the universe functions according to a system. Abdurrahman leaned forward, replying quickly. And who created that system? Watkins opened his mouth, but no words came out. He closed it again, realizing he was caught in a logical trap. Professor, Abdurrahman continued in a calm and composed tone, the Quran presented this truth over 1,400 years ago in Surah At-Tur, verse 35. Were they created without a creator, or are they their own creators? This verse directly challenges human reason. It is impossible for something to come from nothing, and equally impossible for something to create itself. Therefore, behind all of this, there must be a creator. A deepening whisper spread through the hall. People were no longer laughing or mocking. Instead, they began to sincerely contemplate. Watkins exhaled and forced a thin, tense smile. You are clever, he admitted, but this debate is far from over. I still have questions that challenge your religion. Abdurrahman smiled gently and nodded. Please, Professor, I'm ready. The tension in the room grew even sharper. What had started as a seemingly one-sided show now felt like a true battle of intellects, and Abdurrahman proved to be no easy opponent. He spoke not just with conviction but with profoundly striking logic. Watkins, despite the pressure, was not ready to surrender. As a symbolic figure in the atheist community, defeat tonight would be a devastating blow to his pride and reputation. He straightened up and stared intensely across the table. All right, he said. Maybe I can't refute your argument about the existence of God. But what about your religion? Islam is full of strange and restrictive rules. Why would a merciful God forbid simple pleasures like eating pork or drinking alcohol? If God created everything, why wouldn't he allow people to enjoy it? The hall stirred. This was the territory of religious laws. But Abdurrahman did not even blink. He looked at Watkins and asked, Professor, if someone gave you a luxurious, high-end car, would you treat it carelessly? Of course not, Watkins replied. And if the car's manual clearly stated that the engine required a specific type of oil, would you ignore that instruction? Of course not, Watkins said again, now slightly frowning. Then why, Abdurrahman continued, is it strange that the creator of human beings would give instructions on what is best for our bodies and souls? Wouldn't the creator know best how to take care of his creation, just like the engineer knows the machine he designed? Again, a heavy silence fell over the hall. Watkins fidgeted uncomfortably at the table. Even some of his followers looked uncertain now. Abdurrahman continued, the prohibition on pork and alcohol is not about denying pleasure. It's about protecting us. Scientific studies have shown that pork can carry harmful parasites and diseases, and alcohol damages the body, destroys families, and causes countless accidents. Islam forbids these things not to punish us but to preserve our health, our dignity, and our communities. Watkins exhaled sharply. He hadn't expected Abdurrahman to answer with scientific evidence. But what about praying 5 times a day? Watkins challenged. Or fasting for an entire month? Isn't that an unbearable burden? Why would God complicate the lives of his followers? Abdurrahman smiled. Professor, if you wanted to have a healthy, fit body, would you exercise only once a month? Of course not, Watkins replied. Exactly, said Abdurrahman. The 5 daily prayers are like spiritual hygiene. Just as physical exercise strengthens the body, prayer preserves the purity of the heart and the clarity of the mind. It disciplines the soul, brings peace, clarity, and a connection to the Creator. Even scientific studies have shown that the movements during prayer improve circulation and reduce stress. Heads in the audience began to nod. People were no longer just observing. They were reflecting. Watkins, more unsettled now, asked another question. And fasting? Why would a merciful God ask people to starve for an entire month? Isn't that cruel? Abdurrahman took a deep breath and answered with serene confidence. Professor, when you want to cleanse your body from toxins, don't you undergo a detox process? Watkins slowly nodded, almost instinctively. This, Abdurrahman continued, is spiritual detoxification. Modern science confirms that fasting regenerates cells and improves health. But more importantly, it teaches self-control, cultivates empathy, and gratitude. Fasting helps us understand the suffering of the poor, who endure hunger not by choice, but by circumstance. The whispering in the room grew louder, but it was a thoughtful murmur this time. Watkins could feel the atmosphere shifting. The energy that once supported him now seemed unsure, even doubtful. God does not give us rules to make our lives harder, Abdurrahman said, looking Watkins straight in the eyes. He gives them because he knows what is best for us. In Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 286, the Quran says, Allah does not burden a soul beyond that it can bear. Every command is a path to goodness, not a punishment. Watkins fell silent. He looked like a man caught off guard. After years of debating and humiliating believers, it was the first time someone had countered each of his arguments with sharper, stronger logic. He bit his lip, clearly embarrassed. He did not want to lose. He could not afford to lose. All right, he finally said, his voice trembling slightly. You've answered well, but I have one final question for you. The room froze. Every eye turned to Abdurrahman. Watkins' next question came out low, tense. If God is all-powerful and all-loving, then why does he allow suffering in the world? The room grew even quieter. No one moved. No one spoke. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the answer. Abdurrahman simply smiled, as if the question was not new to him. Professor, he said gently, have you ever been to a gym? Watkins frowned, not understanding where this was going. What do you mean? In a gym, Abdurrahman explained, people lift heavy weights. Their muscles ache, they strain, they sweat. It hurts, but they do it anyway. Why? Because they know the pain will make them stronger. Watkins stared at him. His expression began to change as he realized the direction of the argument. Life is the same, Abdurrahman continued. Hardships and suffering are not signs of God's absence. They are part of the test, the growth process. Without pain, we wouldn't develop. Without trials, we would never mature. God gives us these tests not to break us, but to raise us higher. Silence filled the room again, this time not from mockery, but from deep reflection. And God has promised, Abdurrahman added, again in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 286, Allah does not burden a soul beyond that it can bear. Every hardship has a purpose. Every pain is a chance to grow. It's not cruelty. It's love. Watkins looked at Abdurrahman with awe. For the first time in his career, he felt something unfamiliar, defeat. He opened his mouth but said nothing. His mind, usually sharp and quick, could not find a response. The mocking crowd was now silent. Some even looked visibly moved. And then the realization struck Watkins like lightning. All this time it wasn't Abdurrahman being tested. It was him. Watkins gripped the armrests of his chair. His body tensed. His thoughts swirled. He tried to find at least one last loophole, one weak spot to exploit. He couldn't believe that a young, unknown Muslim had countered every strike with answers that were not only logical but transformative. I'm not finished yet, Watkins said in a much quieter voice. I have one final question. Abdurrahman calmly nodded. Please, Professor. Watkins pointed to the same glass of water with which the debate had started. Let's go back to this, he said. If I pour poison into this glass, whoever drinks it will die. But if I pour honey, it will bring health. Do you agree? Of course, Abdurrahman replied. So, Watkins leaned forward. You admit that the contents of the glass determine whether it causes harm or brings benefit? Yes, Abdurrahman agreed again. A small, hopeful smile flickered across Watkins' face, as if he had finally found a flaw. Then tell me, he pressed, if God truly exists, why does he allow people to fill this world with poison? Why does he allow some people to become evil and others good? If he is all-powerful, why doesn't he stop them before they can cause harm? The tension in the room returned. This was the very question Watkins had hoped would turn the debate in his favor. But Abdurrahman did not flinch. He carefully picked up the glass, lifted it, and looked at it for a moment before answering. Professor, he quietly asked, who is responsible for what is poured into this glass? Watkins blinked. What do you mean? I mean, Abdurrahman explained, if someone pours poison into this glass, is the glass to blame or the person who poured it? Watkins remained silent. He saw how the trap was closing again. This world, continued Abdurrahman, was created pure, like this glass of water. God gave us a beautiful, balanced world, but he also gave us free will. He gave us the right to choose, to pour in honey or poison. Watkins opened his mouth to speak, but Abdurrahman hadn't finished. God did not create robots that can only do good. He gave people the ability to choose between good and evil. This is the test of life. If he stopped every evil act before it happened, we would no longer have freedom. And without freedom, goodness would have no meaning. The silence grew heavier, but now with deep understanding. Even the most stubborn faces in the crowd began to soften. Imagine, said Abdurrahman, if every time someone tried to steal, their hand became paralyzed, or every time someone tried to lie, their mouth was sealed. Then no one would do good by choice. They would simply be forced. And forced goodness is not real goodness. Watkins swallowed hard. The analogy struck him harder than he expected. Imagine a student at an exam, continued Abdurrahman. If the teacher gave him all the answers, would the student learn anything? No. He might pass the exam, but without growth, without true understanding. Watkins sat motionless, stunned. Each of Abdurrahman's words pierced the fog of his thoughts with sharp clarity. God gave us reason, heart, and guidance, said Abdurrahman. He did not leave us alone. In Surah Al-Insan, verse 3, the Quran says, indeed, we guided him to the way, be he grateful or ungrateful. He looked directly into Watkins' eyes. God gave us this glass of water, but what we choose to pour into it, honey or poison, is up to us. And one day, we will all be held accountable for what we chose to fill the glass of our lives with. Watkins froze. Words failed him. He stared at the glass as if seeing it for the first time. His hands trembled slightly, and his eyes filled with tears. Silence reigned in the hall. Even the mocking laughter had died down. The staunchest supporters of Watkins now looked shaken, uncertain, almost fearful of what had just unfolded before them. Then something completely unexpected happened. Joshua Watkins lowered his head. His shoulders shook. Tears streamed down his cheeks. A gasp came from the crowd. With a voice trembling with emotion, Watkins raised his eyes to Abdurrahman. Eyes no longer filled with arrogance or pride, but with confusion, vulnerability, and, for the first time, humility. My whole life, he whispered, I attacked something I never truly understood. His trembling hand reached out to the Quran lying on the table. He slowly picked it up, holding it with reverence, then pressed it to his chest and wept. His followers, those who once cheered every insult, now sat in stunned silence. Some with wide eyes, others wiping tears from their faces. Something profound had happened in that room, something eternal. The young Muslim named Abdurrahman had entered the hall as an outsider but left as the man who made the proudest atheist bow to the truth. The night that began with laughter and mockery turned into a night of deep silence and reflection. At the center of it all, before hundreds of witnesses, the proud atheist professor finally submitted to the truth. And it all started with a glass of water. Time seemed to stand still. No laughter, no whispers, just quiet, expectant breathing. Joshua Watkins, once feared for his sharp tongue and intellect, now sat on the stage crying, the Quran clutched tightly to his chest. His eyes were red and swollen. His shoulders trembled, and his lips whispered words only he could hear. His followers, once so confident in his victory, sat stunned, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Their intellectual champion, the man they once idolized, was defeated, not by insult or aggression, but by the quiet logic of a 20-year-old Muslim named Abdurrahman. And yet Abdurrahman did not gloat. Instead, something much deeper filled the room. Humility. Watkins looked at Abdurrahman in disbelief, still trying to understand what had just happened in his soul. "I attacked the truth my whole life," Watkins said, his voice breaking. In the crowd, a woman wiped tears from her cheeks. "I read the Quran," Watkins continued. "I analyzed it, looked for flaws in it, but I never truly understood it until tonight." He looked at the glass of water still on the table. "I always demanded evidence, something I could see, touch, measure. But I forgot that some of the most real things in life are invisible." Abdurrahman smiled gently. "Like a thought," Watkins said. "Like love. Like truth." He paused, then added with a quiet nod, "And like God." Suddenly, someone in the hall jumped up and shouted, "This must be a joke. You can't be serious." Watkins looked at the man, his eyes calm. "I am more serious now than I have ever been in my life," he said quietly. "I was wrong all these years. I rejected not because I understood God, but because I refused to try." A murmur rose from the crowd, not of mockery, but of doubt, of reflection. Watkins' followers sat confused, watching their leader crumble, not in defeat, but in revelation. "Professor," Abdurrahman said softly, "life is a journey. No one is ever too far gone to return. If your heart has found the truth, the next step is to embrace it with sincerity." Watkins looked at him, his eyes filled with a new clarity, a new light shining through them. "I want to read the Quran again," he whispered, "not to challenge it, but to understand it." An elderly man in the back row wiped tears from his wrinkled cheeks. Others who once mocked Islam now sat deep in thought, some with tightly pressed lips, others with lowered heads. The room was no longer a battlefield of ideas. It had become a sanctuary of reflection. Then, a woman in the front row timidly raised her hand. "Is it possible," she asked in a trembling voice, "for me to have a copy of the Quran too?" Abdurrahman smiled warmly. "The Quran is not only for Muslims. It is guidance for all who seek the truth." The very hall that once echoed with ridicule now radiated silence and sincerity. That night, many hearts were touched, and many minds began to question their former beliefs. Watkins, his eyes still red, extended his hand and for the first time shook Abdurrahman's hand. Not to argue, but to learn. That night, the crowd of intellectual atheists witnessed not just a debate. They witnessed a transformation. The proud atheist professor, known for his scorn, bowed before something greater than human pride. And it all began with a single glass of water. The atmosphere had completely changed. Those who once expected Abdurrahman's defeat now watched in disbelief as their proud leader held the Quran as if it were the most precious thing he had ever touched. Watkins wiped his tear-streaked face and looked at Abdurrahman. His face showed reverence, sorrow, and newfound clarity. "I spent my whole life searching for the truth in all the wrong places," he said. "I rejected God not because he didn't exist, but because I never truly tried to understand him." In the front rows, some began to weep openly. They had expected to see a Muslim humiliated before one of the world's sharpest atheists. Instead, they saw that very man bow before something far greater than human intellect. Watkins once more glanced at the glass of water, and this time he smiled, not with mockery, but with reverence. "I used to think I understood everything," he said, "but tonight, from nothing more than a glass of water, I realized there is something far greater than human reason." He turned to the crowd. "If anyone here is still seeking the truth, read the Quran. Read it with an open heart." "I know I will." Abdurrahman said nothing, He didn't need to. That night, his logic, patience, and sincerity spoke louder than any argument could. And though only one man openly embraced the truth that night, many hearts began to crack under the weight of what they had witnessed. The light had pierced through, and once light enters, no darkness can extinguish it. This story reminds us that truth is not conquered by shouting. It reveals itself through clarity and sincerity. Abdurrahman didn't use anger or emotion. He used calm reasoning, thoughtfulness, and unwavering faith. It also reminds us that often the greatest obstacle to the truth is pride. Joshua Watkins was a brilliant thinker, but his own ego had blinded him for years. One evening, a young man reminded him that truth is greater than intellect, and that faith is not weakness but wisdom. And finally, this story teaches us that sometimes the simplest things, a glass of water, can carry the deepest lessons, because truth doesn't always need grand gestures. Sometimes, all it needs is a sincere heart, a calm mind, and the courage to listen.